All right. And then we let it count up a little bit. Let it breathe. Some of the podcast editing and other conveniences. Let's go live in 3, 2, 1. Can we trust Rhamondre Stevenson? That and more this week on the couch. John Daigle. John, can we trust Rhamondre Stevenson?
It would be significantly easier if Damien Harris were ruled out, but it looks like after Harris returned to practice on Tuesday, he may be turning around for Thursday night against the Falcons. But I think we've seen enough from Stevenson to at least assume he will have some standalone value as a pass catching option. Just to have 5 targets, 4 catches. Those 5 targets, though, this past week were more than Harris had accrued in any single game this year as a workhorse. I don't think they're going to remove Harris from the frame. He has 300-yard rushing games. He has 7 touchdowns, tied for 4th most in the league this year. He's a very good player. You don't need to take him out of the offense just because we like the sexier, all-encompassing option of Stevenson. But can they work together, and can Stevenson have standalone value moving forward? I think he's shown enough to earn that, honestly.
Yes. I think you asked the right question at the end, John, because don't look now, but the Patriots are hot. Right? Yes. They're one of the hottest teams. If we were just looking over the last month of the season, they're one of the best teams in the NFL. And everything is pointing up, right? Trent Brown back, offensive lines, gelling. Bill Belichick is back to his wizardry on defense. What they did to Cleveland, it was just that easy. Why wasn't everyone doing that to Cleveland? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, but it's amazing somehow that some of these sage coaches, John, make it look so easy where it's so difficult for other teams. And you look ahead at the New England schedule after this week against Cleveland, a weakened Cleveland team. I'm sorry, after last week against Cleveland. So this week, Atlanta on Thursday, Tennessee, which the offense is going to be successful. Buffalo, which I don't see. I know Buffalo's defense is tough against some of these young quarterbacks. We'll see if it's Mac Jones, but I trust in what Jones and McDaniels are doing. Indianapolis, Buffalo again, and Jacksonville in week 17. So that doesn't seem like a lot of resistance to what they want to get done on offense, which is run the ball. So there's room for both. And Stevenson looks better than Harris. Harris is hyper competent, but Stevenson has more with his power and burst combination. And does he get trust from Bill Belichick? Well, he didn't practice. I made the joke, John. I guess I shouldn't joke about Old Testament God, but I made the joke that Bill Belichick is like Old Testament God because he said, don't think you know what I'm going to do, when everyone said, well, he didn't practice. Belichick's not going to play him that much. He didn't practice all week. So there's something there. I think Stevenson's growing on them. And I think you're right to say there's going to be value going forward, even if Harris comes back and they split the backfield. But we're assuming it is at worst going to be a split backfield.
I think it's going to be a split backfield. Having said that, isn't it interesting how skinny and upright he stays as a bigger body dude when you watch him run? Like, not only his patience, but he slips between tackles with ease, if I can put my hand in the dirt and talk about his film. Like, it is actually exciting to watch him run because he's an electrifying big player, and we just don't see that often. So I think there are roles for him to play alongside Harris for sure. And also, step back and provide context to adding Stevenson, especially, week 11 at this time off waiver wires this year. How many players are really available on waiver wires that you could say you could plug in as genuinely top 12 players at their position? So whether Stevenson earns a role or not, you're still breaking the bank for him because he's one of the few impactful players remaining alongside A.J. Dillon. But A.J. Dillon has been rostered for weeks now. He's not even a contingency player, Dillon, because he's been averaging double-digit targets in his last 5 or 6 games. So I think just getting ahead of Stevenson is the smart option, whether he's going to have standalone value or not.
Yes. I love the point you bring up about him. One of the things that I would dissect from that is he's got good feet, right? He's a big man. He runs with power, but he's got good feet. He's not like Michael Bush or a big back who wants to be dainty, but he uses his footwork. He uses that subtlety to set up the power. And I was talking about this when they took Stevenson. I thought that's the perfect team for Rhamondre Stevenson. And we're already seeing it come to fruition, even though we usually have the Belichick red shirt year. All right. Well, that's the waiver wire pickup of the week. Let's talk about another waiver wire pickup. Or maybe not. Maybe the idea is let someone else pick up Cam Newton. Do you believe? He talked about we're out in the desert. He said he was mentioning Moses. And he said, where are we? There is and Robbie Anderson's with him. What a picture. What a picture that this Panthers season might turn around. Could he help turn around fantasy seasons?
I think so. Just to provide, I know it was 2 touchdowns. Touchdowns, of course, the one stat that we can't chase because we're just not sure. But just to come in off the bench and provide that upside and show that he's more than willing to run. That's what I was concerned about. Because remember, even in throwing just 8 touchdowns last year, he didn't get you there in fantasy as a low-end QB1 through the air. Literally 50% of his fantasy points were derived from the ground with his legs. And so it was concerning thinking, okay, he did discuss maybe not running as much because he was banged up every Monday and Tuesday last year following games, but to just come in and literally on his first touch to plow through a linebacker, just stiff arm him and then take his helmet off and yell he's back. He truly was back with his legs. And that's what we're chasing for that rushing upside, because that's how you enter the QB1 fray among these statues who we see, like even Matthew Stafford. If he's not getting there with his leg, as good as he is, he still could struggle to provide QB1 numbers whenever he isn't seeing the field correctly. And so with upcoming games against Washington, who I understand they played well against the Bucs, but they really didn't change their defensive scheme. Tom Brady was literally just dumping off. Tom Brady actually finished 3rd fewest in air yards per attempt this past week. And Washington wasn't even creating pressure. They weren't doing anything differently.
Yeah.
It was just an odd approach from the Bucs offense altogether.
Right.
And now worrisomely, this is back-to-back games that the Bucs and more importantly, Tom Brady have struggled. But also beyond Washington for the Panthers, the Dolphins, and then the Falcons. Right. So a little small stretch here where we could see Newton provide light. And like I said, with the rushing upside, that's how you become a low-end QB1.
Yeah, he was almost there last year playing with nobody in New England. And he's got Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore and a good defense. So it's fun because even though sometimes it's just denial, I think the Panthers brass still thinks they have a playoff hope, not just a hope. They see themselves as a playoff team. And what about the writers of the NFL season this year, John? Adrian Peterson coming back to replace Derrick Henry. Well, kind of part of Derrick Henry. The Odell Beckham, great Aaron Rodgers story. I mean, there's so many great stories. And now we add Cam Newton, I'm back. And it was beautiful. It was great to see him because, John, I think that there are certain players that you watch them and you feel like they've never really gotten a fair shake, as far as their greatness. Cam Newton's one of the great quarterbacks of this era, but I don't think he's gotten that kind of acceptance. Now we could get it in. We could spend more than an hour talking about that subject, but in that moment, he felt that it was almost like out of a comic book when they do those comic book drawings on Fox. I think they're starting to change my brain, right? But it felt like one of those moments, like you could see it, like the lightning bolt out of the sky when he like charging when he was, and then the team feeds off of that, right? So on the flip side, we have Odell Beckham. I guess the easiest question to ask is, are we worried about the Rams? Is this all blowing up in Sean McVay's face? Is it really just that Kyle Shanahan owns him? There's also Matthew Stafford's story and how that intersects. Oh, he's finally not on the Lions. Well, what was the joke everyone was making last night, John? You pull off the mask and it's really Jared Goff. Oh, dun, 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 you meddling kids. So where are you at as the Rams go into their bye and have to do some soul searching?
I'm still not worried too much about the Rams. This is obviously what happens when you put your team on literally just 5 players, hoping for the best. All 5 great players, especially the 3 on defense that they're building around. Nonetheless, just depending on 5 players, though. Also, it's helpful for the Rams that there is no good team in the NFL this year.
No.
Everyone is fighting for participation trophies, trying to sneak into the playoffs. We talked about the Patriots at the beginning of the show, but look at who the Patriots have played recently as well. They got the Jets and Zach Wilson at quarterback. They got Justin Herbert. For as much as we love Justin Herbert, every team wants to play the Chargers offense right now. Right. The Panthers and that Sam Darnold injury game, and then PJ Walker, and then of course the Baker Mayfield injury. So even the Patriots, as good as they looked, we could just look at the quarterbacks they faced too and just be like, well, yeah, but they haven't played competition. And that's been the issue with every single team. I thought among that poor slate of football in week 9 that I genuinely never want to talk about again, I thought the Bucs were the biggest winners, and they were on bye. They didn't even play.
Right. They didn't get the stain of it on them. Yeah.
They got to watch the Bills and the Cowboys just plowed through by the Jaguars and Broncos with ease. And then the Bucs return, and they also fall victim to the same thing. So I just question, you mentioned the awards. I question the awards. Like, I still think Brady's the league leading MVP right now, but anyone can make a case for anyone. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, just throw them out there, whatever. Anyone can make a case for offensive player of the year, defensive player of the year, also wide open. So it is truly a year of parity for better or worse. And that's what I just think about whenever the Rams, the 49ers at one point 3 games ago were worrying as well. And now they're back in the picture. The Bengals we thought were, or, some thought were contenders.
Right. #1 seed at one point.
Right. But they're still hanging around. The Browns, for as many issues and injured players they've had, they're still hanging around top their division as well. It's literally just everyone's game.
It is. You could easily see a team sneak into the playoffs at 9-8. That feels weird to say. 9-8 and get hot. Like Tampa did last year. Not that they were 9-8.
Well, you know what that team is. Like, the Chiefs are probably going to have to sneak in.
Sure.
And if that's the case, like, imagine betting against the Chiefs, like against the Bengals or the Titans. You wouldn't.
Well, the Chiefs playing spoiler is perfect, right? Because when you get to the playoffs, what matters a lot is experience, or otherwise the constitution to not shrink as the stage gets bigger. That's what happened to the Bills last year, right? I mean, they got farther. I've compared it to mountain climbing. You get higher on the mountain, the air gets thinner, and sometimes you have to get up to near the top and pass out and realize, oh, I have to bring better supplies if I really want to get to the top of this mountain. And the Chiefs have gotten to the top of that mountain. And you're right. There's a lot of other teams that you have, like, again, it's morbid, right? Like the bodies on Mount Everest. You know what I mean? But there's, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, et cetera, and then NFC, like you mentioned, there's no good team, quote unquote. It's wide open. The MVP stuff. Go ahead.
I was going to quickly say, and again, going back to the Rams really quick, it is that, like Mark Cuban used to say, he writes, or when he does so, like, works with a lot of concentration, he does so with volume, like with music at the loudest capability, because like when there's so much of something, there's nothing of something. And thus, like, when every team in the league is struggling, in my opinion, no one's struggling. And that's why I don't think Rams, like anyone, should be freaking out right now, because nothing is changing, because everyone is still trying to fit the mold and figure out something.
Well, it's like,
except for the Lions.
Except for the Lions, because that's just their destiny to, well, at least not lose 17 games.
Right.
But what I see happening, John, is exposing teams getting exposed, right? And it doesn't mean that it's going to work. There's lots of variables, but one of the things coming out of that Rams game last night was the Rams don't like it when a game is physical, right? The Rams don't like it when a game has that edge, that street fight edge, and that can cause them to shrink up. We saw Josh Allen really get baffled by having to be disciplined and take what the defense gives him against the Jags. We've seen the Chiefs turn into a team that likes to put together long drives to keep their defense on the sideline so they can win against mediocre teams. Now, the Raiders game notwithstanding, and we'll see if that sparks, hey, we're back. But we've seen these ebbs and flows where teams get exposed. Denver just ran at Dallas, and Dallas shrunk. And we sometimes have to try to discern between, like, Dallas, maybe it was just a bad day. Buffalo, maybe it was just a bad day. I've been talking a lot on my show this year, John, about how teams are social organisms. This is where the Odell Beckham stuff comes into a little bit. Teams are social organisms, and there are things that are out of view to us that can explain what happened when a result seems on one end of variance instead of in the middle near, like, what we judge as the mean or median. This Miami-Baltimore game, right? Everyone knows Miami blitzes, except for Greg Roman, I guess. And that resulted in that. And I think it was, I can't remember which analyst it was on Twitter. I don't know if it was Brian Baldinger, but it was someone in that vein. It was like, well, Greg Roman better figure this out, because everybody's going to keep doing this until he does.
Yep.
And that's more like what I think we're learning about teams. But the thing is, you face opponents who don't take that shortest distance line between point A and point B to stick to what they do. And go ahead.
And I think that's been the fun intricacy of this season, more so than any other season I recall. And, you've been in this longer than me, but I've been toiling around in the background for
this season's crazy. This season took
15,
the brown acid.
16 years now, just grinding. And I cannot recall so many times where you have to first look at the safeties and the defense that is being played to truly analyze player situations. And honestly, it's making fantasy for me more fun because it's more intelligent this year. You talked about the Cowboys against the Broncos. The Broncos didn't blitz Dak. Dak going into that game had a league-high 13 touchdowns against the blitz. It was wise to not blitz him, and yet every team does. The Broncos played cover one man coverage, though, and Dak threw for only 50 yards and a pick against man coverage. That's why the Cowboys struggled. A lot of drops along the way, like CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper had some big instances where they should have moved the chains, but the Cowboys struggled. Past week against the Falcons, guess what they did? They blitzed Dak again. And guess what happened? The Cowboys ran them over. Also go to the Chiefs. The week prior, the Chiefs were not a sexy and fun offense. They just threw the ball at the line of scrimmage and hoped for yak. No big deal. And we know that because teams had been playing two high safeties against them. What does Gus Bradley do? He continues running a league-high rate of cover and Patrick Mahomes eats him alive. Also, really quickly, go back to the Bills against the Jaguars. The Jaguars just stunt four guys. They literally just they don't send a blitz at all. They just say, okay, we're just going to play zone against you, and you have to beat our four-man pass rush. Josh Allen could not because he was not capable of throwing deep with as much time as he had protected behind the line of scrimmage. Then you go to this pass game, and so at least Daigle changed the game altogether. Josh Allen's 57% play action rate was the highest of any quarterback this year, and his 300 yards from play action was the most of any quarterback from that scheme since 2016. And so you're seeing like little intricacies like this that I think are truly making the NFL and fantasy football more fun this year. But also, for as much as like we don't like to see teams run the ball, it's becoming a situation where they have to run the ball.
Yes.
I do those injury tweets on Tuesday morning, afternoon, just to say, okay, if you're doing waiver bids, get ahead on this player because if this guy's injured, then the fallout is this guy becomes a better option for fantasy. And last week with Zach Moss injured, I mentioned Matt Breida, and everyone asked, even in my Tuesday waivers Q&A chat, 6 p.m. Eastern, NBC Sports Edge YouTube, shameless plug. Everyone asked, why Matt Breida? And I said, because they have to run the ball, and they know that. And there's no better situation to run the ball and just see if you can get right than against the Jets front seven. And what happens? Matt Breida, he got lucky in getting there with 2 touchdowns on the fewest snaps among Moss and Singletary. But the fact is, he cannibalized everyone and made all of them essentially useless for fantasy. But it was a necessary evil because they just have to involve them more to free up Josh Allen.
Yes, teams have to run the ball. It's fun that the run is kind of back in fashion, or at the very least, we don't have to justify the value of the run anymore. I really think Brandon Staley put it to bed when he said it forces the defense to take on blocks and tackle, and that's important. Fatigue is important. The mental, emotional, imposing your will on one another battle is important. The X's and O's are important too. I mean, you can identify those weak spots in a defense, or otherwise, when a defense allows themselves. So it's advantageous for the defense to probably to induce runs over passes, but you can still turn that into a positive if you're putting your offense in good downs and distances and otherwise keeping the defense on the field. So you're right. I think there has been a pendulum swing back, and that's partially why Buffalo went home last year, right? Because they couldn't run the ball. And we'll see. Anything there with Breida? Go ahead.
I'm very curious also to see. I cannot wait for the playoffs because, like, I question Mike McCarthy has a great chance for Coach of the Year, but we've also seen Mike McCarthy's in-game decision still this year have been very poor. Even something as most recently as settling for like a 58-yard game-winning field goal that Zerline had to make, for instance. And he made it, but that's not the process you want. So I'm just very curious to see McCarthy, McDermott get into the playoffs, play close games, and then see what happens. Because the Bills did run over the Chiefs when they played them this year. But recall last year in the AFC Championship game, they kicked 3 field goals in Arrowhead inside the 10-yard line. That's not how you beat the Chiefs at full strength. So I just want to get there and then see if the coaching shows that these teams are truly trying to win or if they're just trying to save their own asses.
Right. And it's so funny that you say that too, because one of the points I wanted to make talking about the NFL and how there's no good team, right, John, is that you really can look at most of these games and you can boil them down to probably 4 or 5 plays. And oftentimes those plays involve a bad call or a missed call, or they'll involve just a bounce or a break, things that are even inherently unpredictable. And that is the difference between some teams being 3-7 and 7-3. And you're always a few teams. It's like the Chargers every year, right? There are always a few teams you can say that about, but this year it feels like it's every team. It's every team is walking that tightrope between irrelevance and a first round bye, the only first round bye in the conference. And then you introduce the other variable, which is frustrating as a fan or even watching football through a fantasy football lens, is the game management by the coaches. Oh man. And we're making it further down the road thanks to people like Brandon Staley. See, even though the Chargers are really dragging at this point, I still love Brandon Staley. Because I love how you said it correct, like it's subjective. It's an objective fact that you should love Brandon Staley.
Brandon Staley as well. And they're still passing at a top 10 rate on early downs, which is what we like from our offenses, because good play callers know the most efficient plays on first and second down are targets to tight ends and running backs. Mm-hmm. So we don't want runs on 1st and 10. We want to get even closer to the chains with upside and throwing to those players. And Staley is still doing that. Now, the shallow A-dot, the play calling on 3rd down, that's what we really need to work on here. But I still trust him, honestly. I think he's intelligent enough, and he's proven that he can get this ship right.
Yeah, Joe Lombardi, right? When you the part you're saying don't trust, maybe that's the part that's Joe Lombardi. And let wild horses run. Like let Justin Herbert play a bit freer. That's when he was at his best last year. Yeah, we'll see. The Chargers get the Steelers on Sunday night. Mason Rudolph, maybe. That's tough times as a Steelers fan. Although I'm glad that the game last week was memorable, about as memorable as a terrible game can be in terms of everyone will always remember that. So you add in game management, and what it creates, John, like I'm really we're very, very far from fantasy football right now, but
that's the fun part though. I don't think we are
that's true.
When we listen to the Athletic Football Show with Robert Mays and Nate Tice, when we listen to Michael Lombardi, I think the big picture topics do help your fantasy analysis and decision making. Like even if anyone listening is not writing about football, that's totally fine, because I think it makes us better with start sits, honestly, by learning all of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and it helps you have a better chance of taking a stab at the why, which then gives you a better chance of at least narrowing down how close you can get at predicting the next data point. That's always what we're doing, right? We're always predicting the next. Go ahead.
And the scary part, though, is that when you start learning the why, you start to realize that everything is a why, and that there is no answer for everything.
And the whys, it's like weather, right? How many variables go into predicting the weather, John? Like 30 or 40 or something like that. And sometimes it's variable number 7, and sometimes it's variable number 12, and sometimes it's variable number 21 and 22. And depending on the matchups, depending on how the coaches engage each other, it makes different variables glow. And then we think, okay, well, next week, those are going to be the ones that are operative. Nope, it's going to be something else, which may make sense in hindsight, but is very difficult to anticipate.
The woman I'm talking to gets not frustrated, but she knows what's coming anytime she asks, what's for dinner, assuming I'm not cooking, because I love cooking. It's a passion. Because my answer is always, it doesn't matter. And I feel like that's my answer to a lot of fantasy football analysis as well. I just say, it's cool that Javonte Williams is breaking all these tackles, but doesn't matter. Vic Fangio doesn't know broken tackle rate. He doesn't care. And so it's genuinely not that it doesn't matter. It's just that it doesn't matter towards the context of the way we're trying to use that information. And so that's what happens also when you start learning the why. It's but that doesn't matter.
Well, there's no skeleton key, right?
Correct.
There's no Rosetta Stone.
Literally, in the moment there's one, just know you're going to get knocked on your ass, because there is not a single one.
Yeah, and that's, I think, and the whole process of creating models, the process of doing data science is a very worthy and valuable exercise and endeavor. And you have to do it kind of like how we operate in life, John, right? Where you're seeking the answer, knowing that there isn't actually an answer. But by doing the seeking, by doing the journey, other things reveal themselves. You learn other things, like the things that stimulate us. And it's the initial asking of the question and the attempt of solving something that's unsolvable that gets the ball rolling. But I do notice that there's, I think, less zest for models now. I think we've reached this peak in fantasy football analysis. I think people are approaching it in just about every possible angle there is. I think there was a peak a few years ago of, well, maybe there is a skeleton key. It, like you said, broken tackles or expected opportunity or something. And it just the NFL keeps blowing it up. The variance is just getting wider week to week. And it's just making it so that it humbles you. And the best thing you can do is let go of what have maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago was leading you to success and just accept what's happening now. So yeah, it's a fun time. Go ahead. It doesn't matter.
We're seeing the destruction of models, like you mentioned. That I probably added some emphasis, some feeling to that, but we're seeing the absolute destruction of models in DFS this year because the median projections are just no good. It has become such a game theory. And like, I'm not even having success this year. I think I've only won 2 weeks out of 10. Nonetheless, though, I'm having a great time because it's genuinely making me smarter. It's teaching me so many things. And just look to last week for the most recent example. Mike Williams was the better tournament play, but then everyone is so sharp. The game is the sharpest it's ever been this year. Thus, what happened is that Keenan Allen, the cash game play, came in like in mid-stakes, high stakes, 15 to 20% less roster than Mike Williams. Thus, Keenan Allen was the better tournament play because the good tournament play is then over-rostered and no longer the good tournament play. And so you have to start thinking about that like ahead of time, 3 steps ahead of everyone, and then pivot to Allen before lineup lock because that's the game we're now playing. And I think it's honestly just a lot of fun.
It is fun. And that's the part too with DFS that's just wild. And I haven't really dipped my toe into much for a few years since I moved to Louisiana, but I think everything's getting online here. Yeah. Well, it's because there's an element of DFS. If we just go off on a DFS tangent here for a second, that is you are predicting the psychology of the crowd. And then that's a variable in your decision making, which is just scary, really. I think. but like you said, what it is that when your natural analysis process leads you to an outcome, now you know, well, there's going to be a lot of other people that have walked down that same path. So it's crowded, and the way to stand out is to have some sort of uniqueness and to go the opposite direction of that very sound analysis, which ties us in a knot. I'd love to. It doesn't matter. I'll leave that aside. I almost wish I would have known ahead of time, John. You would have had this theme for 2021. It doesn't matter because what's great is that really does capture a lot of things, or even just the idea that things that happened 4 weeks ago or 6 weeks ago don't matter now. It's best just to flush that. What else can we talk about? What else is a good thing on people's minds right now in fantasy? Go ahead.
You reached out and mentioned, going back to the injury tweet I have about Dallas Goedert being out and why that process was not leading me to Tyree Jackson or Jack Stoll. And so I'll answer right here. I'll make the argument that I still believe targets are earned in the NFL. And I don't expect Tyree Jackson or Jack Stoll to earn targets like Dallas Goedert. Go back as recently as that Chargers game, and we've seen Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert account for 70% of the Eagles' targets. They cannot support 3 guys. And this past week, whenever Goedert went out, Tyree Jackson and Jack Stoll still came in. But really what happened is that the Eagles leaned on a new season high rate of 11 personnel, and it was Quez Watkins who quietly tied Devontae Smith for the team leading targets. So I just assume it's going to be heavier rates of 11 personnel, 3 wide resets for everyone who doesn't know. And then that means it's going to be Devontae Smith and Quez Watkins as the hierarchy at the top, because I don't think they can support 3 players, let alone a tight end who I understand was injured in the preseason. I know was a darling in preseason DFS before injury, but even so, like, I do just question if he can actually like earn targets in that offense.
And it's a good test. This is a great Quez Watkins DFS lineup game, or what the heck flex in your redraft lineups, because this is going to be an interesting test. Again, talking about it doesn't matter. Here's what doesn't matter. The pass rate of the Eagles for the first, 7 weeks of the year.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter because they are a Jordan Howard team now. And that's great, except you're facing the number 1 rush defense in the league this week against the Saints. So Do you go back to Jalen Hurts passing some more? Let's see. Nick Sirianni doesn't necessarily seem like the most reactive, responsive head coach at this point. I mean, it did take a game against the Lions, I think, to arrive at this run heavy mode. So we'll see whether he counters and says, I need to come up with a game plan that is a pass first game plan because of the team. If you're running on first, second down against the Saints, you're probably not going to be in a great third down situation. And then you get to the Saints and their breakdowns in the secondary, right? I mean, this is the signature of the Saints secondary. And that's where you get lead you to Quez Watkins, who had a long touchdown glance off his hands last week. Just got to grab the ball, man. So I like that. I mean, you're looking for that player, that unique player that other people aren't going to be on. I can easily tell a story. Go ahead. Tell me another story.
Well, to your point, since week 6, the Eagles do have the highest run play rate from neutral game script. We use neutral game script, of course, because that shows intent, and that's what we care about. Everything gets skewed with a lead, with when you're trailing. But what do coaches really want to do? Again, we're talking about, we started the show with big picture, like defense. What do coaches want to do? Like, that's what intent is. It's one score situations. And also we can attest that the Eagles will continue doing this now, because since they've been doing it, they've been a competitive team. Started with the Lions game where they ran them over. They hung around with the Chargers, forcing the Chargers to a final drive to ultimately win that game. Last week, you saw them run over the Broncos. And so, of course, in Nick Sirianni's mind, he's telling himself, well, we're running heavily. We've swung the pendulum all the way after basically just letting Jalen Hurts only throw through the first month of the season. Let's just continue this because this makes us a better team. And it doesn't matter whether I believe that or not. What matters is whether Sirianni believes that. And of course he does, because they are being a better team. The good news is, though, we are seeing Jalen Hurts like slowly figure it out. Like even on film, he's doing more throws, like getting hit right beforehand. He's making more wiser decisions and sliding and checking down. So I think he is slowly becoming a better player now, even though he's getting fewer attempts. So that's at least good to see, because he's still getting his production from his rushing. Just to continue being, like, let's just say last week, still a low-end QB1, because he can still run the ball even in not throwing the ball heavily. So he's learning and getting better. Thus, we're still sticking him around in our starting lineups with confidence.
Yeah, a few of the throws he made last week, John, genuinely impressed me from an NFL standpoint in a way that he hadn't been impressing me as a passer. So I think you're right. It is funny to watch. This is all filed under, it doesn't matter, right, John? That as the Eagles get more competitive and Hurts actually affirmatively plays better, his fantasy stock's going down. It doesn't matter.
Not only fantasy stock, but his outlook for the team. Like, this team still has 4 picks, 2 in the first round.
Right.
And, no, is it 3 in the top 15?
3.
Yeah, 3 in the top 15. And then
as of this moment.
And then 1 in the second round. So you have to imagine, like, they have a choice as well. Like, who knows? Since Hurts was essentially, a Peterson pick, we don't know if they're just going to package for Deshaun Watson for Aaron Rodgers and just try to get something out of this. I would imagine that's what they want to do. Yeah,
there's no reason to be getting ahead of ourselves, but it's easy at this point. I think you know what it is, John. It's seeing the Seattle result at Green Bay and feeling it was the final nail in the coffin in the Carroll Wilson era. And then you start to think ahead of, well, Wilson could switch teams next offseason. Rodgers could switch teams next offseason. Watson, and so on and so forth, Matt Ryan, and another interesting musical chairs situation with quarterbacks this offseason. But we're still in 2021. We're still talking about the 2021 season.
Right.
So anyway, again, this contrast, where is Nick Sirianni just, well, this works and I'm going to keep doing it? Or does he say it was working? And like you said, there's an anticipation, well, the Saints are going to make sure it doesn't work, so I'm going to come out and counter that. And you even saw last week with Belichick within the game going light against the Browns defense. They go down the field on him, then inducing the spread with the heavy box, checkmate. And Belichick, I think, was one of the first ones to lead us into the week-to-week game plan and focusing more. And when I had Warren Sharp on, I remember he talked about this a few years ago. The game plan should focus on the weakness of the opponent, not the strength of your team. And maybe if they align, that's even better. And we're seeing which coaches can figure that out and which coaches can't. I'll give you just an open-ended one here, John, okay? Stephon Diggs, right? Last week, on some accounts, it was a return to sanity week after week 9 was one of the weirdest NFL weeks. The glitch in the matrix, right? Josh Allen on Josh Allen. It caused something in the matrix to spit out all these strange results. But some of those results in week 10 were returned to sanity. And in Stephon Diggs' case, it was finally the result that people were looking for when they took him with top 15, top 18 pick. And it was real simple and straightforward, right? There ain't no one on the Jets that can check Stephon Diggs. Josh Allen knows that. Stephon Diggs knows that. There was even a juncture where they went to the same play twice in a row in the end zone because, well, the first time it almost worked. Let's just do it again. And it worked. Is there anybody like that right now that you think is another sleeping giant that could wake up like after this week or down the stretch? People will say, Keenan Allen, it's happening. I think we're in mid Keenan Allen, going back to being Keenan Allen. Who do you like here when you think of somebody that's going to remind us who they are?
We've already talked about the Chargers. I think the Bengals will continue to pass more down the stretch, especially since we see post-bye bumps. Because again, I've said this on a ton of shows the past 2 weeks, but we've seen role changes out of buys because that's truly the only time teams can implement changes. 14 days off, that's when you make your game plans, as opposed to literally taking 6 days to prepare for the next opponent. There's no time for role changes in between practice and then. So I think the Bengals are another one out of the bye. Chargers, Bengals, and I guess, the Bucs are an easy one to figure out too, since they've struggled. Yeah. Also, just in having so many injuries they're dealing with as well. And they expect reportedly for Rob Gronkowski and Antonio Brown to both be back Monday night too. And so once those two players come back, those are Hall of Fame players. And we're seeing that when fully healthy, they're still monsters, both in fantasy on the field. So I would expect them to come back, and then we pretend like nothing happened in the Washington game. So I think those are easy picks. Also, I'm still, because what's happening with the Vikings is that they genuinely compete in every game. Like they're a lock to cover every single week. It just comes down to fluke. And this happens every year for the Vikings, but fluke decision-making, fluke actions at the end of games. But either way, they're in literally every single game. And so I do wonder if they sneak in and perhaps make it to at least the divisional round as well.
Right. Interesting game between them and the Packers this weekend for sure. And you're right. It's easy to imagine. They're a team, ideal team for that conversation about change these 4 plays and they go from being out of the playoffs to in the playoffs. That's how their season is gone, which unfortunately for Vikings fans, it's probably like too familiar, right? I mean, I always every year.
It's them and the Chargers every single year. And again, like even when we thought the Chargers had all nice things, still struggling though.
Yeah, the first month of the season, it really looked like Brandon Staley had gotten this thing going. They were tapping into all that latent talent and ability that they weren't getting the production out of. And we'll see. But because of the ebbs and flows, like you said, I love the way you brought up that teams only have 6 days between games. They're licking their wounds. They're just keeping it going. I've compared it to like 24 hours of Le Mans, or what's the phrase? Paris to Dakar, where it's more important that your car finishes than that you like win the speed part of any leg. You got to finish. Forget about trying to win the sprint. There ain't no sprint to this. And it's interesting because that these teams, some of them at least, are going to look different. I mean, look at what San Francisco's doing. And confidence can beget confidence, but then you also see the pendulum swing back so wildly, right? Like Cincinnati is 5-1. Then they end up losing to the Jets and the Browns, who show their supremacy. But then the Browns come out and they get thumped by the Patriots. And one thing you also brought up earlier is the quarterbacks, right? Baker Mayfield getting knocked out. What quarterbacks have the Patriots been facing? And it's still a quarterback-driven league. And it may just come down to which quarterbacks are the hottest. And you also talked about teams having the bye week to actually do something meaningful to change. And this comes back to what you were saying, too, about listening to Mike Lombardi. Mike Lombardi's great, right? He's that really an inconvenient truth teller for the NFL, like a thorn in their side, right? But listening to him and reading and understanding this is the real way the sausage is made actually informs your fantasy take. So in that case, things that we don't think matter do matter.
And
go ahead.
You're somewhat seeing that with, you mentioned Baker Mayfield. He's just one of many options that he's making life harder for offenses because he's not as spectacular of a player as, the ones you're trying to luck into, the Josh Allen, the Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. It just, you can even tell when watching them, offense is literally, because it's a game of inches. That's not a cliche. This is, every man is out there trying to feed his children. Every player is the best in the world when they're on the field. Now, relative to their peers, they may not be the best. That's when we start to analyze them and say, well, he can't earn targets like Tyree Jackson, but he's one of the best players in the world. That's why he's out there. Having said that, it just looks hard. Everything has to be perfect when you have Baker Mayfield and you don't have Patrick Mahomes. You can get away with mistakes with Patrick Mahomes. You can't with Mayfield. But having said that, whenever you go up for a Patrick Mahomes, that's when the clock starts ticking as well. That's when your career could be over, because that's when you open your 4 to 5 year window and tell your GM, hey, I'm putting my career on the line here because I think this player gets us to a Super Bowl. So it's a double-edged sword for GMs. And again, we're wavering from fantasy, but I think it's also just interesting topics to discuss.
Yeah, and I think that it's been good. On the Couch and the listeners this year have really been, or maybe I'm just projecting this and imagining it, John. It's liberating because I think folks know when they tune into the show, there's going to be football talk, and we all have live minds, and we all are stimulated by watching football, but it stimulates a lot of different things, not just fantasy football takes. And certainly the way these topics interrelate is something that's not lost on people, especially if you're playing DFS. I think when you narrow it down to week, and these are the kinds of things that really are determinative. And it's the kinds of conversations I think that we come all the way back to, right? Like, we got into fantasy football because we love football and the sort of unknowable nature of it as we go through it week to week. And this year has really put that front and center. So I now, on that note, I've been going off the rails a little earlier in episodes this year. So, but before we do that, I just want to say, is there anything you want to, and folks, John Daigle, not Jdaigle, NBC Sports Edge. And there's lots of places you can find John's voice, literally your voice, and your voice in your writing and things like that too. But while you're here on the couch, is there anything do you want to shout from the mountaintops, fantasy football wise?
I will just do my plugs, even though when plugging, it's so transparent. I always go back to the one time Paul Rudd went on the Conan O'Brien show, and he was asked to, he obviously went on to get out and advertise his upcoming movie. And then Conan O'Brien talks to him about the movie, and then he says, roll the clip. And it's a clip of a 70s movie with a cartoon alien going down a hill in a bicycle basket, and he falls off the cliff. And O'Brien, like, it cuts back to the studio, and O'Brien's laughing, like falling out of his chair laughing, and just says, what the hell is that? And Rudd goes, come on, man. Like, I'm not going to come here and transparently pub myself. No one wants to hear that. We're just here to have a good time. So this is when I roll the alien clip falling off a mountain. And then I will say also, waiver wire column on NBCSportsEdge.com. It comes out every Tuesday morning, and then I do a chat, and then I go back and update it so it's the most actionable as possible. For instance, it'll be more actionable tonight, 7 or 8 p.m. Eastern, because now, what we can probably get into after this, Elijah Mitchell broke his finger last night, apparently. And so we're looking at a Jeff Wilson, Trey Sermon. We have to monitor JaMychal Hasty situation moving forward. But that is there. Also, a good football show on iTunes and Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. I think I'm literally on 6 or 7 times a week. It feels like that anyway, so go there. Yeah, it's fun. It's a good shop Pat runs over there. And of course, you also, right now you are in Evan Silva's attic, literally in Evan Silva's attic, yes? Literally in Evan Silva's attic for one more week. And we talked about this last time I joined the couch. Yeah. Which by the way, is also pressing for this season, because everything that's happened, I've created the hashtag the longest season ever, because it just seems like there's always something. It truly is the longest season ever. There's just always something. Every time you turn the corner, I'll go out for a nice little run to run away from my problems, and it's beautiful and sunny out. And then I come back and it's just 3 things have happened. Yeah. For instance, the Mitchell broken finger out of nowhere. And it just keeps on stacking up. And that's not a complaint. I'm just saying it is the longest season ever. And so I'm glad, though, I came with Silva initially last year. We did it again because of, and we talked about this earlier in the offseason, battling mental health issues and drinking myself to sleep on my own every night. I was locked in without friends and family in a true lockdown pandemic. And so I just escaped that. And now it's been good to be around someone who also grinds like myself into the wee hours of the morning, just talking about football, bouncing thoughts off your friends.
Yeah.
And I think the difference this year and being here is that the past 2 years have really taught me out of the pandemic it's a very Buddhist teaching, actually. It's very Western theology and being kind to your emotions. It's almost like I've taken those demons and now I sit down for drinks with them every time they come around. Like I've almost learned to accept all of them and just welcome them in and then bounce back afterwards.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much I could go with there. And again,
I knew that was a sentence for you. Like you were going to.
Yeah, we're on the couch. No, we're on the couch. And of course, in this episode titled "It Doesn't Matter," Buddhism will come up. But there is that idea of being kind to yourself. First of all, I want to say again that you living in Evan's attic, I think, is the most perfect manifestation of what fantasy football really does for people, which keeps us from being lonely, as you described. And yeah, as soon as you mentioned the Eliza Mitchell thing, I'm thinking, okay, I got to go update this. I got to go update this. I got to go update this. I'm not going to do it while I'm recording because we're going to give our full attention to our couch session here. And that is the nature of it, right? Cecil, I think, says, we don't have a life, you do, so let us worry about all these things for you. Yeah. But this idea of drinks with your demons, which is especially Freudian, since that's kind of where you meet your demons. But at the same time, it is when you said that, John, I was thinking Looney Tunes. Everything's like in Looney Tunes in my head. Is at the end, it's like the wolf and the sheepdog, right? And at the end, or is it Wile E. Coyote? I don't remember. Anyway, at the end when they punch out, then they like hang out and they're friends, and that's just your demons are doing their job the same way you're trying to do your job, and your demons are angels too, right? I mean, that's the thing. Depending on the lighting or the form they take or what you feed them, like gremlins, right? So it's funny that you say that too, because I'm going to go off on a little personal tangent that I usually don't. I mean, everyone gets real personal here. I don't know how personal I am or not, but definitely
I have that reaction on people where somehow we always end up getting personal with one another because you can trust me. I'm your friend. So
yeah. Well, that's the whole thing, right? I think so I really believe, John, that we upload and download each other's souls when we meet, like eye contact, like we get a feel, there's just a vibration that passes and you get a feel for somebody. It's not necessarily conscious, the process of it. But I think my mom used to always say this. I think I got it from my mom, when she said, all the crazies all find me and they all talk to me. And they'll tell me all their problems. But it is this feeling that you can project of, I'm not going to judge you. You're okay. You can be vulnerable. You can be honest. And I find that actually, again, in fantasy leagues, I find even some of the emails we get from people are very vulnerable, and people talking about things going on in their life and how listening to the show helps pass the time during a difficult period of their life. But I want to circle back to something, because this for me has been very hard. And I think I'm 46 years old, John, and I'm still a mystery to myself in many ways. And I'm learning about the process, I guess it's emotional intelligence, really, of understanding to be kind to yourself and validate your own feelings, right? I mean, you mentioned alcohol and alcoholism, basically, by implication. And I grew up as in a household with two alcoholics. And I think there's a process that you undergo anytime there's trauma in your childhood, of telling yourself something that makes it okay, but in the same process, you're invalidating how you really are feeling, like freaking out. And then it almost becomes like a learned skill. But then, like you said, you forget to be kind to your own emotions because of that. And that's something that even as we speak, I'm still learning or even becoming aware of, that it's even happening, right? These things are so embedded. But by talking about it with each other, by learning that you're not the only one, and maybe not, or you're not the only one, but everybody has these. So here's the theme, John. Here's the theme. And you do this so well, man. You do it well because you deliver your story, the Cliff Notes version of it, but still with all the dignity that you carry. You're not ashamed. You're not trying to say, like, when I think back, like you said, you have drinks with your demons, right? When I think back, I'm just so disgusted with myself or something like that. You're like, no, it was a natural process, and that was how it unfolded. And because we, especially with the advent of social media, but it was there before social media just amplified it. Everybody projects that everything's great. Everything is on track. I'm always on my highs. It's getting better and better and better. And especially since the pandemic, everyone's struggling more in some way or another. It's harder. Like, we're not getting the same oxygen that we got. But because we can't admit it, and I've touched on this many times over the last year and a half on the show, because we don't admit it or share, it isolates us and it makes us feel lonely. So we all should try to find the Evan Silva's attic in our life. And John, we'll be waiting for you there.
Well, it's something, I don't know if I'm proud of it, but it's something I'm happy to talk about, just because it's always important when you see, like you mentioned, everyone's life looks great on Instagram, on social media. That's why you should step back and remind yourself that success, happiness, it's all subjective. Like, it's just all what matters to you the most. Even something as simple working out, what works for me, going on long runs, I would not only tell people not to do, because I can understand how a 7 to 10 mile run is agonizing, but it's like meditational for me. It lets me escape. The sun hits you differently. It's also like a Buddhist teaching, since we're already on this course. And by the way, this is now embedded in my brain, because I listen to a lot of different podcasts, just a ton, because I think we should all derive our creativity and thoughts from everything. Like when you read fantasy football content, and I still take in so much content around the industry just because I'm friends with everyone and I like to learn as much as possible every single day. I don't look at the picks. Like, I generally don't care that they tell me to play Robbie Anderson or whatever. What I look at is the process that gets them there. Like, what categories, what angles are they looking at? And so that's why I read and listen to everything to get my thoughts, and then try to hone it down to how does this help me with my career and life. But I was listening to the Tim Ferriss show this offseason, and it was he always has authors on. He also has other experts on around the industry on, and someone mentioned that the book he included, the book Already Free is the title, is one of the most impactful pieces of literature they've ever read. And so I picked it up, and genuinely it includes thoughts from a behavioral therapist on Buddhism and Western literature, and just like why you react the way you do. And I think one of the biggest takeaways was, this is something I've implemented every day now, is that remember when the sun hits you, like, sure, there are endorphin reasons why you react the way you do, but also, like, the sun's rays are not vicious. They don't cause a reaction. Like, the way you react is something that's going on in your own life. And so that's the way I treat everything now. Like, everything is the sun's rays, and I react to everything by my own accountability. Like, I have to be the one to figure out why I am reacting that way and adjust accordingly. And so I think just that thought has genuinely helped me out a ton, both, like I said, sitting down for old fashions with my demons, and also just going about and learning more in life.
Yeah. Well, it's the flip side of that. Change your perspective, be flexible, where it's really positive and good for your mental health. Nothing is ever really out of order. The universe is always in perfect balance. It's us. It's something in us, in our ego, that is out of balance. Okay, you mentioned cooking. We've got just like a couple more minutes. I want to go to cooking. It's a little brighter, lighter.
We could do this for like 3 hours. Yeah, we're gonna need. We're gonna need an off season. Hey, come if you want, but don't want to, because we're gonna do a 4-hour on the couch. Yeah.
Right. Well, and really, what we need to have is like the fantasy football convention, where we don't talk about fantasy football. Speakers include, and we're gonna have these panels, and we're just gonna talk about, when I feel lonely, this is what I do. I binge on sour candy and watch baking competitions, which brings me to cooking.
What's your favorite sour candy, really quick?
Well, Sour Punch does a really great job with the combination of the firmness, chewiness of it, and the intensity of the sour. So that's kind of where I'm right now, like getting like, and their Halloween stuff was just on clearance, and it's grape and orange, like purple and orange, and the orange is a really excellent flavor of orange. But probably I could do a nice podcast on sour candy, because if I ever see one, I try one, and I have very strong opinions about it.
Have you tried Rips before?
Yeah, the little Rips, the little rugs.
Oh, I still think that is the best possible candy.
Oh yeah, and those are like a traditional one. I think you see those a lot in like the stores, like to have all the different.
Gas station, like 7-Eleven.
Exactly.
All up on their flavors. I like Rips. And very quickly before we get into cooking, my favorite candy still, though, is Australian licorice. And everyone thinks licorice like black. No, it can be, but Australian licorice is watermelon cherry, and it's pungent and packed with flavor, almost juicy. It's just anywhere, any hippie store you go to, Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, literally just go to the candy, buy a pack of the licorice sticks, and I assure you, it is significantly different and better than Red Vines or Twizzlers or like the American licorice you get. Just trust me.
Yeah, Daryl Lee is the brand I like the best.
Yes.
I've tried a bunch of different brands, and absolutely the mouthfeel of Australian licorice. See, this is really candy. Why didn't we just start at candy like minute 3? And we could have done a whole podcast on candy, right? But the mouthfeel of Australian licorice, John, it's almost like it's like dough, right? It's like candy dough.
It's like, it reminds me like Toro, like the tuna belly, just like the savoriness, but in candy form. I understand comparing fish to candy is not ideal, but like just the way it melts in your mouth because it's perfection, like melting butter. That's the way like it just feels. It's so good.
Yeah, if you get one thing out of the show, good. If you like candy, if you have a sweet tooth, and man, I do. That and already free. Okay, so I'll tee it up like this for you, John, because you said the cooking's a passion. If you were like come over to my place and you're gonna cook a meal, what would you cook? Like, what's the one meal you would pick to show people you're cooking?
I would ask you your food allergies first. What you prefer.
Good.
If you say, I'll give you 2 options because I think 2 options are very easy for groups. If you say steak, I will, or meat, red meat in any way, I will go to the butcher. We're not going to buy from the store. We're going to go to the counter or the butcher properly, get some fillets, some proper big fillets, and then sear them on both sides for 2 minutes in a pan of a dash of olive oil, a garlic, cut the whole bulb in half. We're not going cloves. We go the whole bulb, put it in grass-fed butter in the oil, and then you tilt the pan 2 sides and you're basting it. Then you stick that pan in the oven for 5.5 minutes. That's going to give mid-rare. Literally take it out and serve it to you after letting it sit for 7 minutes. And when you cut it, it should be beautifully rare to mid-rare. That's how we eat it. And then I'll serve, I do hand cut, double fried on the stovetop as well, sweet potato fries. And so that's what I will serve to you. Maybe mix in some asparagus as well. If you don't want meat and you want to go something else instead, it's probably going to be pasta sauce, which is just going to be going and getting a can of red tomatoes, whether they're already purged, whether they're already peeled. I still just want the sauce and the puree bland. And then I will personally add salt, coarse salt, good, perfect kosher salt, ground black pepper, also a bulb of garlic, a dash of olive oil, a handful of basil, and a dash of red chili flakes. And we'll just mix it around. Once we boil the pasta, we will just mix it in with tongs. We're going to let it do that for 5 to 7 minutes. And then I'll funnel it up, serve it to you with like a little basil leaf because you need the dressing as well. And then homemade garlic bread. Yeah,
garlic is important. The important thing here is garlic.
Garlic is in everything I cook.
There's never enough garlic. Like there's no such thing as too much garlic. Fresh garlic. Yes, it's good for you. It's good for your life. And I feel like if we just talked about food, because my wife loves to cook, loves to bake, especially, hence the baking championships. Ooh. We're going to try to make fantasy baking championships a thing, right? Like in the year 2021, it's all about getting out to the territory before other people. It's the fantasy cooking. I know Fantasy Bachelor and Bachelorette has like kind of come on. I'm telling you, it's coming, or at least I'm going to make it come. Fantasy.
I can do it. It's a little different though because it is more like a science project.
Yes.
If you tinker one thing, you need to tinker something else.
Yes.
Because the experiment will go awry quickly.
Right. Poof. But she would say one of the things, and we're like right up against it. I can't go over an hour. That like Irish butter, right? Like Kerrygold butter. Like it'll change your life, right? Is there something else that jumps to mind? It's like while people are listening that they just need to know about that could change their life in their kitchen.
Let's just keep it simple since we've been on this theme, and I will say literally just stick with the garlic. Don't clove it. When you cook in a stovetop, when you cook in the oven, literally chop that thing in half to activate it and throw it all in there because who knows? You may or may not come back to it, but also garlic is like 89 cents. Don't be frugal with it. Just get it in there because it's going to make it even more perfect. Yeah, no, garlic. And these are things I think my wife talked about. Her father would eat raw garlic every day. Like, I think that these are things that probably hundreds of years ago people understood, right? He was the vampire's way. And otherwise, it's good. Have you ever seen the film? Oh, man, hold on a second. It's a Les Blank film about garlic. Now that you've said that, I want to make sure. And Les Blank is garlic. It's called Garlic is as Good as 10 Mothers.
And if you love garlic, folks, you got to look this up. And then you get into the Les Blanc documentary rabbit hole. Garlic is as good as 10 mothers. It's an old documentary, 1980. And go ahead.
And we got to stay under an hour. I will also say very quickly, this is the first time I've said this, by the way. Last year I did Fleets, which Twitter took away, where I did all my recipes and people loved them. And you should keep an eye out this off season because I may or may not have a cookbook coming. I'll just say,
yes.
I may or may not be coming.
Man. Will you promise that if there is, either way, we're going to do an off-season show and there'll be no expectations of any football. We're just going to talk about your cookbook, whether it's the virtual cookbook or the real cookbook.
Yeah.
All right. Deal?
It's coming. Deal.
It's coming. Yes, folks. There you go. This is exciting. This is like as genuinely excited as I've been at the end of an episode of On the Couch. And I hope you are too, folks out there. We want to help you enjoy things because you're